Pete Yost here for the Unbuild It podcast with a word about our sponsor, Huber Engineered Woods. There are really three reasons why I think Huber Engineered Woods stands out, and it's a big part of why they're a sponsor of our Unbuild It podcast. First, they develop systems of products. The products are compatible and integrated. Makes our jobs a lot more easy in the field and when specifying. Second is superior tech support. There are really good website resources that they have developed for the application of their products, but they also have an outstanding 800 numbered tech team that really knows their stuff. And the last is a really active technical research and development team with whom I've done a lot of work over the years, and I have a lot of faith in the information I get from them when I have questions about product performance. So that's it. That's our high performance sponsor. Now on to the podcast. Welcome to the Unbuild It podcast. I'm your host, Pete Yost, and Jake makes me laugh all the time. I'm here with Jake and my buddy Steve.
Hello. Good day.
And this episode's topic is ventilation. And I think one of the hardest things to explain to people new to the building industry and or your clients is, yes, we're going to make your house so airtight that we have to introduce outside air.
Oh, when you said venting, I thought you meant like, I had this client the other day and I thought that's what we were getting ready to do. I need to change my notes here. Never mind.
You were so counting on being able to vent.
I thought this was a podcast about bitching about clients.
And so when we talk about ventilation, it's trying to bring in three things, right? The right amount of air in from the right location, drawn from the right location, and then according to the right schedule. And that's the difference between just whatever the cat dragged in and improving air quality by bringing in outside air. So,
do we want to start with ventilation that we don't want?
Ventilation that sure, I'm very intrigued.
Well, let's start with it's uncontrolled. We have the leaky house. That's what you just said.
Yep.
It's unfiltered. It's untempered. It's willy-nilly. It's crappy windows, crappy doors. It's a 8-inch duct that just goes from the exterior of the house into the mechanical room and just is a hole that you could get a raccoon through, you know. But that's how we did it forever.
And so a quick question for each of you. Do you remember the first house that you did whole house mechanical ventilation on?
Yes.
Steve, do you?
Yeah.
Do you care?
Mine wasn't that long ago.
So just like, what were the throws that you went through or considerations?
Oh, I had to argue with our HVAC guy as to whether or not it was important. As to whether or not it was a good idea. It was an addition.
And it's interesting because the second acronym letter there is V for ventilation.
Ventilation, yeah. But we had when we started doing all of the, what I think of as a upgraded performance, as soon as we started building beyond code, it was a knockdown drag out with every HVAC guy that we worked with for the first few years, period. Oh, you can't do that with a mini split. That won't be comfortable. Mm-hmm. You know, those mini splits, they get dusty and then they just quit working. You know, like they just didn't understand the technology. So it was the same as anybody else in our industry. The second you do something different or new, they want to poo-poo it because it's not the way that they do it. And they think the way that they do it is correct already. Interesting.
And so what mechanical ventilation system did you install the first time through?
I don't even remember the name of the manufacturer. It was it was built in a Braun plant, but it wasn't a Braun unit. Braun makes an incredible amount of ERVs for other people too.
Interesting.
So if you're getting
so it wasn't ERV, an energy recovery ventilator, which we'll come back to in a second.
Yep. Yeah. If you're getting chances are if you're getting a private label ERV that is not a major manufacturer that you recognize of HVAC equipment, Braun probably makes it.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
I think they're the largest manufacturer of ERVs in the U.S.
Steve, your first whole house mechanical ventilation.
Zender.
It was a Zender, your first one?
Yep.
Passive house?
Yep.
That passes
So
house
that same
on,
project, the first passive house that you did?
Yep.
Yeah. Did you have any trouble selecting the system or working with your
Nope.
HVAC
Zender
contractor?
was a top-notch system back then, or top-notch company that was very collaborative effort. The builder was very good, open-minded. We were all kind of
Trying to figure it out.
Trying to figure it out. So the builder just used it as a learning experience. Good mechanical contractor.
Did you already had contacts at Zender at that point too, right?
Yes.
John?
Yep, John was there.
So did you get that relationship as the result of this, or
No,
did you
John
already
was
knew
a-
him?
John was a professor, right? He was one of my professors in college.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So we had a long
John Rockwell.
John Rockwell, who's no longer at Zender.
Wow, okay.
Oh, interesting.
He's moved on to other high performance companies. So he's actually in Russell, Switzerland as we speak.
So we started with probably the high end of how you can fulfill the requirements for whole house ventilation,
Being an ERV.
being an RV. So let's go through what the options are in terms of how can you ventilate the whole house. And we're pretty much going to start at the opposite end, which is continuous exhaust. So how does that work?
It goes and dumps it outside.
And then you can never exhale. Steve, we're telling jokes over here.
So if you ran your range hood,
Actually,
if you ran your range hood 24/7, that would be continuous exhaust, right? Or a bath fan.
And you're right, it is a continuous sucking sound without relief. And it's the least expensive,
Yep.
right? And
Carries the biggest penalty, probably.
well, and not only that, but it probably satisfies the least well, right? Because where is the air coming from? It's still coming from where the cat dragged in, right? There's no dedicated source.
Interesting you said cat dragged in. Do you know that I did a ventilation system for a cat litter box that was on a motion detector for a project?
Wait a minute. You did a ventilation, dedicated ventilation
System to the
for
cat
kitty litter.
box that was on a motion detector.
It's pretty genius, actually. Why not? Did you have to mount the motion detector down low?
It was the cat litter box was in its own like little micro room.
You've never told me this story before.
Yeah, so that's
Can you elaborate a little
That's
bit?
what the cat dragged in. It was a very extremely successful client that was just part of the project.
Man, was there the same level of odor control for other potential sources of odor in the building?
house, I mean, the project we were working on, it was incredible what we were doing there. And this was just part of that.
Substantial budget.
Yeah, it was
Lots of options, lots of choices.
So
4 figures a square foot.
4 figures a square foot. Yikes. So
That's how you get to that point. You put in ventilation systems just for the cat
kitty
to
litter.
shit on.
Right. I guess that goes with the territory. So when you continuously exhaust for your ventilation system,
You continuously depressurize.
and so what's kind of tolerable in terms of pressures? And I say this because Steve and I both worked with or around the Masco Environments for Living program, which had a standard of no more than 3 pascals pressure difference from any location in the building. And I've heard Joe say that, 3 pascals is sort of a general, you don't want to go beyond that in terms of the penalty that might be involved. Steve, did you ever hear anything different than 3
that's pretty
pascals?
much what we test for and such.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a 300 or 400 CFM breaking point on, or at least there was in the code. I'm not sure exactly how it reads in the 2021, that if your range hood was under 400 CFM, you didn't have to provide makeup air for a long, long time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's why you see, when you go shopping for fans, you see a bunch of them rated at like 395.
And we started this conversation sort of with whole house mechanical ventilation, but we're kind of bleeding into the fact that there is a standard, and that includes not just requirements for whole house mechanical ventilation, but also requirements for spot ventilation.
Yep.
As part of the whole package. But for the whole house element, that means that you're slightly depressurizing the building, which would probably be better in a cold climate than in a warm climate or hot, humid climate. Because if you're slightly depressurizing during the winter, you're sort of keeping more of the moisture out of going into building assemblies.
You're pushing less of your warm, moist air into the wall.
Into the walls, exactly. So there is a slight preference to do continuous exhaust in cold climates, but they're always the least expensive approach to meeting the mechanical ventilation requirement.
But a lot of times we make the pressurized argument slightly under pressure to help with like soil gases like radon.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a tricky game to play if you're not going to do balanced. And so we're going to come back to that in a second. So of course, if you can do continuous exhaust, you can do a scheduled supply, which again, the limit would be not to pressurize the whole building more than 3 pascals positive. But there are actually 2 types of supply systems. The supply system that is just a network throughout the building to slightly pressurize it, or the central fan integrated supply, which Steve, was dear to our hearts during the Building America years, because one of the engineers on the Building Science Corporation team was Irwin, who had sort of developed his own patented system for central fan integrated supply. And all that means is that the duct from the outside comes into the supply plenum, and every time the
supply plenum or the return plenum?
Well, I'm sorry, the return plenum. Thank you. And what would happen is because you're adding a little bit of pressure, it's a supply and slightly positive, but the result of this is that since it's integrated with the forced air system, you've got to turn on this big ass blower in order to just get your ventilation.
Yep. So you have to run the furnace's blower to get that air to move through the house. So I've had a couple conversations with HVAC guys that we've worked with in the past about this. And one of them was like, well, you don't have to have it on. It'll still work its way into the house. And I'm like, there has to be a driving force. It can't just be a damper. And if it's dumping into the return side and the fan on the furnace is not running, the path of least resistance is backwards out of the return side, and now we're not filtering it the way you were making an argument that you are filtering.
And for those listening, the reason you dump it on the return side, not the supply side, is because then you're on the outside of the filtration device.
But only if the fan's running, is the argument I was just making.
Yes, but what I'm saying is you don't want to hook it up to the supply side or that, because then the outside air doesn't get the opportunity to get filtered.
Excellent.
Or tempered if the system's running too.
And one of the advantages of the system is that you're now, rather than dumping all the air into one place, it's being distributed throughout the whole building.
But Armin's system wasn't only, it was reliant on the motor from the air handler. And you had to have one of the multi-speed motors, right? It wasn't, like, his device was based on the fact that you could run the air handler at a much lower speed when needed.
Well, I think not initially. In the most early systems.
I had to have to check. I thought it was because it was an ECM motor. It's like electrically commutated or something.
Yep.
And that's what he developed his system on. But his system was basically, as I understood it, the brains were, it monitored the runtime of the unit. And it would have a timer so that if the duty cycle was 20 minutes on, 40 minutes off, it would watch the motor for the air handler. And if it didn't come on in 20 minutes, then it would turn on the motor at low speeds, introduce or induce the ventilation into the house without introducing the heat or air cooling.
And so the cool thing was, if it was calling for heating or cooling, you would get for free the ventilation. But if it was the shoulder season, and particularly, and it wasn't calling for heating or cooling, then you had to start the motor just to do the ventilation.
So essentially, the timer was just picking up the slack time.
Perfect way of describing it.
The unit wasn't running. Now, the benefit of that is you're already paying for the ductwork. So the whole distribution to every room in the house has already been installed because it's in there for heating and cooling. I mean, in some sense, Armin's thing was genius.
The problem is that it doesn't do anything for humidity.
Well, neither does an exhaust fan.
I agree.
Right. But so what we're doing is we're sort of going from the least expensive, the simplest system, and working our way up. Certainly the central fan integrated supply is more expensive and more sophisticated than just straight supply side, which is pretty similar to what happens on the open supply system compared to continuous exhaust. And we're moving from sort of a $200 to $300 range for continuous exhaust up to maybe $500 in the range for central fan integrated.
Maybe a little more than that.
Maybe a little more than that.
The Armin's system was that I remember we I forget the name, but we did that big stucco house right down the street from. I do remember the name. I'm just not going to say it. From Building Science Corporation, and I remember testing it with Armin on there.
Cool.
We went everywhere throughout the house, and we were within 1.5 degrees of temperature.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like up against the ceiling on the second floor and near the basement of the slab on the basement. And we were within 1.5 degrees everywhere in the house.
Yeah, that's if it's a well-designed HVAC system, you're going to get well-designed ventilation.
Yeah.
But there's always this tension between how much air is needed for ventilation, which is significantly less than what's needed for space heating and cooling. And so that moves us to the next category after central fan integrated supply, to balanced. And that means the same number of CFM coming in and going out. And now we have to have a different ducting system or not, right? Because once again, we're going to have that choice. Can we accomplish balanced ventilation through the existing ductwork, or do we go ahead and establish a new ductwork system for the whole house ventilation?
Right. And I think that system then gets broken down into two types. Because the distribution, I'm trying to think if there's more than the two, but I know there's at least two. So there is what I would call the big duct system and the little duct system.
Mm-hmm.
So the big duct, it is duct, not duct. The big duct system is like a renew air system, where you have a pipe that comes in and out of the house and a pipe that in and out of the outside.
Right.
And then one that goes in and out from the house. So it's basically 4 large ducts that dumps into some main room. And, we've done it where we've done some smaller ducts go wying into a bigger duct, and that one big duct goes outside. So you can pull from like a bathroom or two in the kitchen when the system is on. But when it dumps, it just basically dumps into a big room somewhere. And then you rely on, just the natural integration of air to move it around. The small duct system is like a Zender. You have dedicated 3-inch ducts that go to every room in the house, and they push and pull on that room.
And when you're thinking through design, certainly the Zender system is going to be more demanding in terms of design elements to make sure.
It's going to be more demanding, but it also is the better of the systems.
Yeah.
Because it's taking distribution to the extreme.
And so when we talk about the two types of balance, we also have within that 2 types of heat recovery systems.
Yeah, because you can balance the big duct system too.
Right.
Just as much as the little. It's a question of, do you want to have, the system integrating into each and every bathroom and bedroom, or do you want to integrate it to just the big room in the house, the great room? And then, of course, there's the biggest reason for doing these is budget and expense.
Yeah.
Because 4 ducts to a unit that's a little smaller than the Zender, it's a lot easier to solve for than it is running 30 or 40 pipes through the house.
So for the big duct, either heat recovery or energy recovery ventilators, we're talking in the price range of several $1,000s.
I say you're probably
under 5 for a lot of the ones that we've done.
Something like that.
And then when we go to the energy recovery or heat recovery ventilation system with the little duct, now we've moved significantly above 5.
More than doubled.
More than double.
Yeah.
It's a double to start, depending on the size of the house. But like Palladora Homes, we use Renew Air all the time. And that was the big duct system.
Yeah. So we're going to now talk just a little bit about the difference between heat recovery ventilation and energy recovery ventilation. And this comes up all the time with my clients because it's not easy to explain the two different systems. And there's a lot of debate about the benefits of an ERV over an HRV. So in a heat recovery ventilation, the only exchange across the heat exchangers built into the system is to pick up the sensible load. So whatever moisture is moving through, if you're bringing in cold, dry air and you're sending out warm, moist air, you're recovering the BTUs in there, but not the moisture content. There's no...
Why is that?
Well, because in order to capture the energy in the moisture, you have to have some type of enthalpic wheel or medium that allows the transfer of some of that moisture content.
So in a residential ERV or HRV, the membrane basically in the core is different.
Correct.
And part of that reason is because the air that is likely to be winter temperature in an HRV could cause that membrane to freeze.
Well,
it could cause damage to that membrane.
Yeah. So in both HRVs and ERVs, you have to be very careful about accumulation of moisture that will freeze the system, which engages a defrost cycle. And of course, that's a huge energy penalty. So you'd like to keep the heat exchange in such a way that, it's a gradual thing. From the first plate or exchange membrane to the last, you have an opportunity to sort of slide, right? So you don't have really different streams.
So in a perfect world, is there a seasonally a better time to have an HRV or an ERV?
Yeah, so that gets really complicated because it's by climate and then by season.
So let's use climate 5 as the example because that's where we're from.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting at something here, but I want you to answer these questions first.
I've never been convinced that the ability of an ERV to really pick up significant latent load is worth the effort or the cost of an HRV compared to an ERV. And I'm not an engineer, and there are plenty of engineers that say, no, that's crazy. If you can go with it. The other major consideration for me is that there are way too many people out there, including HVAC contractors, that think that you can dehumidify outside air with an ERV.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So you're promoting the use of an HRV in our climate.
Well, so the other thing I like about an HRV from a building science point of view is that HRVs incidentally dehumidify during the winter. So they help to keep the air inside the house drier. Now, occupants might not like that, but I don't care about them. I care about the building.
Because I know
as a joke.
I couldn't remember who it was. I want to say it might have been one of the Zender guys, but they had said, in a perfect world, the beauty of Zender is you would buy both the ERV core and an HRV core and then
seasonally swap.
No kidding.
Yeah, because they have that ability. The core can slide in and out of them.
I have never heard of that. That's really interesting.
We kind of glazed over. You were starting to say the difference between HRV and ERV, and we just talked about HRV. So ERV, there's another load that's taken care of there, and it's the moisture.
Right. It helps to the only thing the ERV can do is it helps to maintain the difference between the two streams. It can't actively move moisture from one stream to the other, but it can help to reduce how much it would dehumidify in the winter or how much it would increase the humidity in the summer. But it can't actually dehumidify.
By trying to equalize.
Yeah.
By enthalpy.
Yeah. Enthalpy is actually capturing both the latent and the sensible load in the exchange. Yeah. So I know we don't have that much time left, so we have to talk a little bit about, how do you go about calculating how much air that you need to do in terms of whole house?
And I want to talk about my failed experiment.
Ooh, we better go through the table pretty quick. So in the code book, there's a section.
And we're referencing IRC 2021.
Which is mechanical section 1505 in general. And you can do your calculation of how much CFM you'll need either by the table, which is based on overall square footage and number of bedrooms, or you can use the equation, which takes into account the overall size of the building by square feet and then the number of bedrooms. So just real quickly, I'm going to read you the equation. Okay. So it's 0.01 times the square footage of the building, the conditioned space, plus 7.5 CFM per bedroom plus one. Okay. So let's take 1,000 square foot house.
Yep.
So if it's 1,000 square feet, we're going to multiply 1,000 times 0.01. That would be 10.
Yep.
Right. And then if it was two bedrooms, it would be 7.5 times three, because it's number of bedrooms plus one. That's 22.5 plus 10. That's 32.5 CFM per hour for the building. And interestingly, if you go to the table, the answer for 1,000 square foot house, 2-bedroom, is 45 CFM.
So the table gives more. And at that level, it's quite a bit higher. But the problem is the category is anything less than 1,500 square feet. So the table is more of a blunt sword, right? Yep. And the table, as we were talking about earlier, says square footage, not cubic volume of air.
Yeah.
What if my house has 7'7" ceilings?
Yeah.
What if my house has 12-foot high?
But the people only live down low, so it doesn't matter.
Only the air down low. No?
Only on the air. We're on the down low here.
Okay, so let's do another example.
Okay, so a 4,000 square foot house, 4-bedroom, that would be 4,000 times 0.01. That's 40. And then 4 times 7.5.
Because it's
30.
No. So we're doing a 3-bedroom because it's 3-bedroom plus 1.
Sorry.
That's 7.5 times 4 gets us to 30.
Correct.
So then we're adding 40 and 30. Steve, can you do that in your head?
No.
That's 70 CFM.
Nothing.
And in the book, so for the requirement for that number is
3-bedroom.
Is 90 CFM.
So it's higher again.
Yeah, higher again.
So in other words,
it's
just playing it safe.
Well, it's what happens when you fall into categories. We use the actual square footage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where here it's 3,000 to 4,500. So if you have a broader band, it has to be
the high side.
Yeah, it has to be on the high side.
And we should note that calculation is ASHRAE's 62.2.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's part of ASHRAE 62.2.
But it's in the code.
It's in the code. So
which is funny because there's not much that's noted in the code that isn't just a check this standard and go someplace else. It's not very often you see a calculation in there.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that it doesn't reference 62.2 here. It simply uses one of the major elements from 62.2. Yeah. 60.2.2 is more complex and takes into account more aspects of what affects the air exchange in the building.
Absolutely riveting read.
Well, I got to give Jake. I mean, Jake's got a relatively well-worn version of the 2021, so it's pretty cool. You even said, like, how could you build if you didn't have a copy of the code book?
How can you possibly do this if you don't know what the rules?
And spoiler alert, we are going to do an episode on how the code gets developed and implications for builders, high-performance builders.
I can't wait.
But, it's interesting you should say that because we're not going to have you on that one. We're going to have a special guest who has special expertise that Jake and I do not have. So you don't get invited. You could listen to that podcast too, though, if you wanted to.
Forget it.
Okay, so you wanted to talk about a failed experiment?
Yeah. So
now he's excited. Now that it's his turn, he's excited.
I'm not gonna tell you about it. Go ahead.
Please, I'm really interested.
So we actually had interest in trying to see if we could heat and cool a house via the ventilation system.
Wow.
It was only an 800 square foot house. The experiment failed miserably. So we couldn't. You're just basically not pushing enough air to change the temperature.
So you're saying that the ventilation air requirements are just not enough to support heating and cooling.
Moving enough air to.
Yeah.
And even in a passive house, you're not moving
Interesting.
enough air that we can make it work.
So to get the fresh air we need, it's just not enough CFM to be able to then also condition air at that level.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So even for a tiny passive house, you couldn't get there.
It was only 800 feet, but it did have 12-foot walls, and the peak was at like 16 feet inside. So it was 800.
Is this one on Martha's Vineyard?
Yeah, it was 800 square foot large volume.
Right. Right.
And
Interesting.
It was a challenge. And the basement was part of the conditioned space too. So it was basically another 800 square feet of space down there.
Interesting.
So you buried the lead. It's not an 800 square foot house. It's a 1,700 square foot house.
Well,
and by volume, it's
an 800 square foot
18,000
house
cubic
to the
feet.
assessor and everybody beyond
Sure.
the person doing the calculation for heating and cooling.
Well, but according to the code, if it's a conditioned space, you'd have to count that.
Well, you're in your 4,000 square foot and 12 or 1,000 square foot. You probably didn't.
We did.
include the basement.
We did.
Oh, yeah, it has to.
That square footage is included in the basement.
So 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom home includes the basement.
No, that's a slab on grade. It doesn't have a basement. Yeah. We counted all the conditioned space.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of
made up houses that we're running
before you
math
guys start
on.
fisticuff, I'm going to put Pete's resource up there.
Okay.
Okay. So for indoor air quality, once again, Building Science Corporation, buildingscience.com has great resources looking at all aspects of mechanical ventilation. But Green Building Advisor, the building science blogs, there's a number written by Martin Holliday. There's a number written by Allison Bales that are really good contemporaneous, so up to speed with the latest changes in ASHRAE 62.2. Those are great auxiliary resources in addition to what we covered in this.
And Allison publishes all kinds of stuff everywhere.
Energy Vanguard is his blog. He's fantastic. He's good at explaining.
Great follower.
Well,
he's
got a book out.
So
too.
Allison, he's a PhD in building science and an acting practitioner that does mechanical design for buildings. We're so lucky to have a guy like him, and many of his blogs are in front of the paywall in GBA or for free on his website. So he's really good.
What's that guy's in Texas?
Oh shoot, Christoff Irwin. They're in Austin. Dang it! I feel so bad that I can't.
It's not Building Science Texas, but
No.
it's something else.
Man.
We'll put it on the website.
Yeah, we'll put a
this
link
episode.
below the YouTube video, and put it in the show notes. I apologize, Christoff. Yeah, they are.
Do you have your phone?
They're doing incredible. I don't, because we're recording and I didn't want it to ring and it'd be a distraction.
I didn't
You know what that's like.
A little bit of a sore point at the end of the podcast. And on that note, we want to thank you very much for tuning in. And Jake's going to tell you all about how to do the proper social media etiquette related to
do
Unbuilt
the thing for the
Podcast.
stuff with the thing. Like and subscribe. Hit the little bell so that you get a notification every time we publish a YouTube video. Steve brings up a valid point now at the end of the episodes. We're publishing 2 videos a week, one on Tuesdays, one on Thursdays. Right now, when this one publishes, you're still working through your Before the Build series on our Hilltop Arrow House.
With Big Red. They're really good. They're
And
really
he's
good.
literally just going through the plans and talking about every decision that was made in the design process and the pre-planning aspect of the construction process. You're right, they are good.
Yeah.
I didn't want to give him credit for it, but they're pretty good. So every Tuesday, every Thursday, there's new content from us on YouTube. And then first and third Thursday of the month, this thing publishes both on YouTube and your favorite audio platform for podcasts. Go to iTunes, leave a 5-star review. That helps other people find us, and that's why we're doing this, is to share this information. We know this. We talk about this. We want to share it with other people now. So help us do that. Thanks for watching.
See you later.